What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today's episode is our June Instagram Q&A. It's been a little bit since we've done an Instagram Q&A. I think we may have even missed May with it, so I'm excited to dig into some of these questions. I was just talking to Brian off air before we started recording, and I'm really pumped about the quality of questions that are starting to come in. Something that I see on a lot of people when they do like Instagram Q&A boxes, they get really just like kind of unhelpful questions. And I'm glad that I'm fortunate, or we are fortunate, I should say, that we have like a listenership that has moved past largely those questions around like what food is best, or these just like really open-ended, vague questions. We get some pretty good questions full of context, which will really allow us to provide a much more robust and helpful answer, which I'm really excited about. And I'm sure Brian is as well. Before we get into these Instagram questions, Brian, what's going on, my man?
Yeah, we have a pretty educated audience, which is very lucky. I wouldn't want to be dealing with all of the noob questions either, but we even did get a really good question from a beginner in here as well, a training question. So anyways, look forward to jumping into those. Quick updates on my end, or maybe not quick, but you know how I go. It has now been like 11 or 12 days since I hit my lowest low for this diet. Which is the longest that I've gone without making like an aggressive adjustment. I think I even mentioned on the last episode that I tend to get jumpy around 10 days. So we're at 11 or 12 days now. The lowest on the lowest low was 184.2, and it has been all the way up to 186.8 in the last few days. And then today it's down to 184.8. So now it's basically within the range of where my low was from 11 or 12 days ago, but I still am, half a pound above that. So I still have not hit a new low. To add to that, now there's a bit of a time concern, and this is maybe where my more aggressive approach is going to come in and be necessary. But basically, I've stated from the beginning that I wanted the diet to end the day that we leave for Wisconsin for our trip, which is going to be Thursday, June 30th. And then I talked to my photographer guy, and we're setting up the photo shoot for either the 28th or the 29th, which means that I want to linear load my carbs for 4 to 5 days before the photo shoot. So that's going to have to start on Friday, 6/24, which is 17 days from right now. So, my goal from the beginning has been to get to what I would call the low 180s. I think the low 180s start below 183. Like I would say somewhere in the 182s would be low 180s. Last year I hit 182.8, and then I was like so depleted, and I only hit it once. It wasn't like a weekly average. It was just, hey, I hit 182.8, I hit my goal, and then I started eating up into the photo shoot. And I was hoping this year to get a little lower than that. I guess that's officially 2 pounds from where I weighed today. So 182.8 from 184.8 would be 2 pounds, which means that it's like really reasonable. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could just not eat carbs for a day and I would hit that number. So it's kind of a little bit ambiguous, and that would totally be cheating the system. But, what I really wanted to do was hit 182 something as a weekly average. And so I think that that's probably unrealistic at this point. But I would like to at least, have a more confident hangout in like the 182 range instead of just one random day where I hit it and then I'm immediately out of it. So I mean, I'm not like super tied to that. Like at the end of the day, the goal is to do my photo shoot at around 185, which is where I've done it the last 2 or 3 years, and get those comparison shots. So how low I actually go isn't hugely important. It's more of just kind of like a personal goal that I had set for myself. So that's the plan with the nutrition side of things right now. If tomorrow doesn't again drop below where I am right now, I'm probably going to make a confident drop in calories, go from something that was around 2,600 average to maybe like a 2,300 average, just because I'm going to have 16 days left basically by tomorrow. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think I have the right kind of perspective on there? What would you input there?
Yeah, I mean, the hard thing is you have an end date and a physique look you need at that end date thing. So I'm a very, very big proponent of being ready early so that you can feed up into it. Yeah, I would start. What I would really do is drop, if I'm being completely honest in this scenario, I'd pull fats down to a bare minimum. Like it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you just don't need them. I would push some of your carbohydrate over to protein from a satiety standpoint, and I would probably pull like 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrate at least to get things moving.
Interesting. Yeah, that's sort of along the lines of what I've done. I've always been like a within range of body weight times 1 per pound. What am I trying to say? 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight kind of guy. Which means at like 185, that 185 would be the protein that I'm eating. But just in the last 2 weeks, literally in the last 2 weeks, I've found myself eating 220 to 240 grams of protein most days, because now when I go into the kitchen to look for food to eat, it's like I could eat these simpler things that aren't going to fill me up, or I could, cut this chicken breast and grill it up and eat that. And suddenly I have like 50 grams of protein and a ton of satiety for 200 calories or whatever it is. So yeah, that's been my approach.
It really is just, it's opportunity cost, right? The worst case scenario with the protein is it becomes an expensive carbohydrate via gluconeogenesis.
Right.
And even if that happens, you're still, that energy conversion process costs energy, right? And we have the thermic effect of feeding, which protein is the highest at on top of it. Like if a food needs to be eaten, right, protein in this context there's just the lowest opportunity cost there.
Yep. No, I totally agree. And so that's been kind of naturally what's happened. What I haven't done yet in your suggestions is cut those like 50 grams of carbs. And that's kind of where I think the calorie drop would actually come in. Is if I drop 50 to 75 carbs, suddenly I'm at 2,300 average instead of 2,600 average. And even though that's only 300 calories, it really does make a difference. Like it can get things moving and kind of be the impetus to create change there. So tomorrow's my day. I'm going to go one more day hanging out at 2,600, see how that goes. And then tomorrow we would drop those last bit of carbs that you suggested if things don't continue moving.
Yeah, and you could always be a little bit more strategic with your daily proportioning of those carbohydrate as well. So making post-workout your largest carbohydrate feeding, trailing off your carbohydrate as you get further into the day because you work out in the morning. So these are kind of more like your kind of little nickel and dime, tricks and stuff. They're not going to have as much of an effect as obviously just pulling the 75 grams of carbs, but it does add up over time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So then going on to training stuff, I had probably one of my least motivated days of training in years. It's been a really long time since I literally didn't want to train as badly as I felt this past Saturday. And I don't know what it was. If sleep was okay. It was really hot and humid, and we went to this thing called a Touch-a-Truck, which is this festival for kids in around where we are. But it basically was the most overwhelming, overstimulating thing that anybody could do. I couldn't imagine how it was for kids because I felt overstimulated. It was basically every type of truck or utility car that is used in a city. So there was police cars and fire trucks and tow trucks and school buses and every kind of imaginable truck there is. And they were completely open, doors open, and the kids were just able to go in the truck, climb around the truck, honk the horns, whatever. So imagine this scene where there's thousands of kids and 100 trucks and there's just horns going off around you constantly. And so we're sitting there in this boiling sun. The kids are freaking out because they don't want to wait in lines. They want to honk the horns and it was awful. So we finally get out of there and get home and I'm sitting on the couch and now I'm supposed to do hamstrings. So I really didn't want to do it. I put it on my story and talked about low motivation and I had this thought that maybe like because I'm in week 5 of my microcycle and I'm into like all of these, reverse drop sets and partials and all these things, that maybe there was a fatigue cost that was so high and I was becoming, overreached. But I went in and did the session anyway, and it wasn't great, but I at least matched or even slightly exceeded on everything. And then still felt like shit afterwards. So it's one of those things where usually you finish training and you finish a session and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. Like, I feel great now, but I was still like, I'm just fucking glad that's over. Like, I don't feel great. I kind of just still feel tired and run down. So then I really started to think that maybe I was overreached. Well, one great night of sleep later and a normal day with no stress. And I felt really good on Monday. Had one of the best workouts of my entire diet on Monday, improved almost everything, including my chest movements, which hadn't moved in weeks. Like, chest are the first thing to go when I diet. So somehow I added a rep to 2 of my chest sets. And overall, just felt really, really good. So luckily, I don't think I'm overreached. I don't think that I went a little too hard in the paint on intensity techniques. And in the name of intensity techniques, I got to do essentially lengthened partials from the get-go for the first time. So this has been one of my progressions on these short overload movements, where it goes like to failure over a number of weeks, and then partial reps, and then a reverse drop set. And now I progressed my 45-degree hip extension into something that is just lengthened partials. So I basically just took the 100-pound dumbbells and did a set of 8 reps where the first rep was probably a full rep, and then there was like 7 decreasing range of motion partials afterward. And that was insane. Like, just as a real hammer, like a true sledgehammer, because I talk about reverse drop sets as the hammer, but just start really heavy and don't even get full range of motion, and that's the true hammer. So I hit 2 sets of that on the hip extension, and I think that that's a very viable next progression for me on these short overload movements, probably like the week before deload at that point. So, and then just on the last note of deloading, my plan right now is to take a full deload when we leave, or as I prepare for the photo shoot. So basically Monday, 6/27 would be kind of my deload week. One of the things that people do in preparing for photo shoots or getting on stage a lot of times is they decrease the volume and intensity of their training as a way to kind of shuttle more glycogen into the muscle cells. So the way that the timing is working out and lining up just right here, I think that if I can push through and not reach this overreach state that I was worried that I was in, and I can make it to 6/27, then that would officially be a deload week. I'll eat up into the show, or into my photo shoot rather. And then we have a 2-day drive where we're stopping in Nebraska to get to Wisconsin. So I won't train for 3 or 4 days on the back end of that deload. And then we'll get to Wisconsin and I can kind of start a new cycle fresh from there. So that's the plan going forward. And if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to address. Otherwise, you can totally jump into your updates.
Yeah, what I think is going to end up happening, as with everything, is you're going to like have those couple days away, de-stress, you're going to clear some inflammation, and then you're going to get to vacation, and you're going to have like one day where you like are a little bit loose with the diet, you have some treats and stuff, and you just like peak that filling out, and you're going to wake up and you're like, God damn it, I look fucking amazing today. And the photo
I should have done that before the photo shoot. Yeah.
It happens every single time.
Yeah.
Like it really, really is an art. Like peaking, like the coaches that can peak people for shows and stuff like that. Like for like the few photo shoots and stuff I've done, I've always been pretty pumped about stuff, but there'll be a day like 3 or 4 days later where I look 10 times as good as the day of the photo shoot. I'm like, son of a bitch.
So on that note, Berto and Brad Loomis and Helms were on the 3DMJ podcast a couple days ago talking about how to optimize peak week. And, we had Berto on here and I asked him about peak week, and he basically was like, no, we don't like to peak. We just like to be ready early and then eat up into the show or whatever. But what they were saying is like Helms brought up is he's like, look, that's not like realistic. Not everyone can be ready early. So what's your approach what's your most common successful approach if someone isn't ready early? And both Loomis and Berto said that they really like to spill someone the night before the show. So you basically eat to the point that you're like, you have too much glycogen in your body. But then over the course of the overnight fast, and then they said they usually won't even have you eat in the morning. You just kind of like wake up looking really good because a lot of that glycogen is kind of distributed over the course of the night. And then if you just kind of walk on in there and pump up and do your show at, 9, 10, 11 in the morning, whatever it is, what was spilled before then ends up looking fantastic, 16 hours later or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle to come from. I don't think I've ever heard that approach. I feel like I would be super scared, from both especially as a client, right? They're like, oh no, we're going to spill you on purpose the night before. And then it'll kind of like work itself back in by the time you get on stage. But of course, like those guys, they have their shit super dialed in. I would trust, anything they would say on that.
And I'm sure they tested it with the client, like in a refeed prior, like weeks prior, to see how their body would respond, how quickly it clears the glycogen and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, what's going on in your world, dude?
Cool. I'll start on the business side of things. So I am very, very, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be about a week after, but there's always the way the Instagram algorithm works. People don't check their emails, different things falls through the cracks. The single most requested feature for my done for you client check-in system, which is the body measurements sheet, is complete. It is shipped. It is out. The tutorials are up. If you are someone who previously purchased it, you get access to that for free. It is in your email. You just have to log in to the straker.co site with your credentials that are in your email at some point and go regrab a copy. I also put up together a tutorial for if you already have a customized version and you don't want to recreate all of that. I have a step-by-step guide on how you can recreate this specific feature with some tips and tricks. So that's super, super cool. Last thing there, I am increasing the price on the check-in system. I've finally decided to listen to everyone who has told me. It is going from $67 up to $99, where it will stay for, I think, forever. I don't like to speak in absolutes, but I will take a little bit of a break from building features and stuff like that because it's up to like 9 sheets as is, and people get a little bit overwhelmed. But I am very confident saying for the less than the price of one coaching client will pay you for 1 month. I give you basically 4 years of my work of building it. So that's super cool. And then my fat loss and muscle gain models, which are a very similar kind of like sister product to the check-in system, have been quite the success. So I am really, really pumped about how they turned out. It has been a very, very valuable tool for me with my coaching clients to help us basically forecast our periodizations, or really when someone's like, hey, I'm turning 40 in 12 weeks, I want to get to 12% body fat. Like, what does that look like? And we run the numbers and I'm like, yeah, it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. So it really just helps with like forecasting and estimating timelines, estimating body fat percentages and those sorts of things. So you can find both of those on my website and my socials, all that sort of good stuff. And then some really cool things happening on the business development side. Nothing that I can really quite share yet, but I'm really, really excited about some of the things that are coming. And I had a note here that it seems to me, I feel like this, with business, things come in things ebbs and flows. Like things will be super, super silent, I feel like, for a couple months. And then overnight, I'll get like a bunch of coaching applications, new business things. People reach out to me for different projects and stuff. And I'm in the latter stage of that where everything seems to be firing at once, which is really, really cool. Those are my updates.
Awesome, dude. Love that.
Business type stuff. I am really, really excited about my training in food. I'm locked in with my food prep here in Macro Kitchen, who is doing basically my food prep, which I'm really, really pumped about. They're just giving me bulk basic items. I'm getting like chicken in a few different formats, sweet potato fries, a turmeric rice, a jasmine rice, carrots. They're just giving me just give me like lean chicken and various, carbohydrate and vegetables. And they're just like killing it. I'm super, super pumped about it. It's like literally mindless. And then I'm just really pumped about training. Like Alex Bush from Physique Development is doing my training. Like I said, we're kind of hitting a groove there. I'm really starting to like push training and just having a lot of fun with it. And I am kind of artificially riding this like, I'm calling it this like pseudo recomp phase. I'm in like a slight calorie deficit. I'm still eating like 2,800 approximately, like 2,750 to like 2,850 per day. But like I'm getting leaner and like reclaiming some of the muscle tissue that I have like not necessarily like lost, but has whatever, deconditioned over the couple months where I haven't been training as hard. I'm really just reaccumulating what I already had, but I'm riding like the wave of like, I'm looking better like every like handful of days. And I'm just really, really pumped about that. So I know,
hell yeah,
obviously that phase doesn't last too long, but it is fun when you are in the middle of it. And I'm just really, really enjoying like eating really quality foods, prioritizing sleep, getting great nights of sleep, waking up early, and just getting back to training and like work, and life is really, really fun right now. So I'm just grateful and pumped about it.
Yeah, you're in because you haven't been like super committed between like your back injury and like traveling to Bali and all this stuff. Like even if you did lose like a little something, now is like an opportunity where you will see those changes because you might be adding back just by being more consistent and being more like accurate with the way that you're doing things. So that's super cool. Are you still hanging out in like the 4 to 6 rep range on most stuff?
Everything is 5 to 8. So how a lot of things look, or it's like so today I had like my main pressing movement, which was like an incline dumbbell bench. It was 6-6-4-4. And then I had the like bilateral chest supported pull down again, 6-6-4-4. And it is fun getting to like really load up weights on those and just try really, really hard. And then as I get into like some auxiliary stuff, like I had some like cable flies, those are at like sets of 8. I have some like dips at like sets of 6. So still like I'm able to like load them up pretty good. And they're not quite like super low reps, but I do have a little bit of more traditional stuff. Like I have conventional deadlifts in my program, which I haven't done in a really, really long time. And what's fun there is it's one of those things like, because I'm just kind of reclaiming what I once previously had, like I can add weight on the bar week over week, which is fun again. The not fun part is you start like week 1, you're like, there's not a lot of weight on this bar and it's fucking heavy and my back hurts, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it is cool. I'm really, really excited to just like give someone else the reins. And I'm like, hey, I'm just here to learn and be a client, you know, to take me where you think we should go, sort of thing.
And then on the 4 rep sets of like a chest supported pull down, what's your RIR? Like that in that 1 to 3 range that you mentioned last week?
Yeah. So we're at like basically an RIR of 1. On all of those actions.
So it's a 4 rep set of pull downs where you could do 5. I mean, that's a really heavy pull down weight.
Yeah. I should video of the setup I have. I have this thing so fucking rigged because it's like I have obviously the chest supported thing. I need to wedge a weight in between the bench I pull over and the structure so that when I try and get in, it doesn't pull me closer to it. And then I have a medicine ball on the seat to get me up high enough so that I have like, I'm lined up right. But then I also need the weight of that medicine ball to help the bench in place. And then as I like go through my warm up sets, I have to keep bringing over like 20 kilo plates and stacking them on the bottom to keep the thing from tipping over. It's getting rather ridiculous.
And it doesn't pull your body up like as you're extending and contracting. You don't feel your body kind of jumping up and down off the medicine ball at all?
It does a little bit, but I have my feet planted in the back of the bench, like my heels
kind of like wedged under.
Yeah, to like help me brace. But I really need to like, I grab it and I like swing over and use my momentum to like get it down enough so I can like kind of wiggle into position. But yeah, it's a lot to get set up for sure. It would.
Yeah.
I think in like a week or 2, I'm going to have to ask like a random gym pro to like, hey, can you come help me get this into place?
I feel like the simple solution for me, because it is like just so dramatic what you have to do there. And even if I did all that, I still think that for a set of that few reps, it would pull me out of my seat. Like I think I would get pulled out just because I have a really strong back. But single arm, like that might be something to propose to Alex is, hey dude, if I can use, 55% of the weight here and do these with one arm, this kind of mitigates a lot of this crap that I'm having to do right now.
Yeah, especially for the lower reps, because they're talking, 10 seconds instead of 5 or something like that. It's pretty small for sure.
Yep, cool. All right. Well, is that all you got for updates?
Yeah. Last one. Oh man. So this, in my program, I have the front foot wedge, rear foot elevated dumbbell split squat, which is a movement I really, really like. It is so damn hard to perfect the setup. I feel like every time it changes a little bit. And like when you nail it, when it's perfect, it's probably one of the best quad exercises you can do. It is so hard to perfect that setup. I feel like I'm always slightly off. There's like one little thing, or the distance between my feet is too close, and then I'm hinging at the hip too much, and I know right by the time that I perfect it, we're gonna rotate and it's not gonna be it anymore, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's been frustrating the hell out of me to try and get it right.
Do you take pictures and by chance even measure some sort of way the distance between, the front wedge and the back wedge?
I did this week. And tried to film it, but of course I'm just out of frame, how I set the camera up. But I got to reach out to a couple of people. I'm going to reach out to is Jeremiah Bear, because he's 6'3" or something like that. I'm how do you set this up? Because it's one of those things when you get the longer femurs, it fucks with things a little bit, because that back leg I think needs to be elevated even higher.
It does, yeah.
But I'm not.
Or the front foot does, so that there's room for the back leg to come down. There's some sort of balance between the two of those. I watched Berto do them on his story, and he doesn't elevate either leg. He only uses the wedge on both the front and the back leg, and he's still getting his thigh below parallel, which is insane to me, because if I just use them with no elevation, it would look as if I was doing a quarter squat basically at the bottom,
Yeah. And one thing that I always remember from when I was in Arizona, I did have the setup perfected. My back leg had to be higher than I thought, so that it would bias my weight forward to hold more of my weight in that front foot. Because when I wouldn't do that, I would notice I would get more of a hip stimulus, or even a little bit more of a glute stimulus there. But I'm gonna perfect it, and I'm gonna film it and send it out. So I'll figure it out eventually.
I like it.
Cool. You ready to jump into some of these questions?
Yeah, man.
Let's kick this first one over to you. So this question is: training with slow, perfect reps with a stretch contract versus fast, explosive reps with more weight. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So this guy then sent a second part and basically was just to make sure you understand, these fast explosive reps still are fully controlled, and they're not, ballistic or whatever. So I thought that was an important caveat too. But so basically science says that as long as you are controlling your eccentric, the lowering phase of the movement, it really doesn't matter. You can do a 1.5-ish second eccentric, or a 3 or 4 second eccentric, and it doesn't make a huge difference. Science does say that it is very important that we try to lift the weight with as much speed as possible. But I think that's the part that gets a little bit ambiguous, because when you're at the bottom of a rep and then you think about creating as much speed as you can out of the bottom, what most often happens is that there's a bunch of compensation occurring as you're launching yourself out of the bottom of a rep. So you can think about this in the sense of any squat pattern movement. But if you truly got to the bottom of a squat pattern movement and then you didn't use any momentum to get up out of the bottom, and you just tried to use essentially your quads to stand up, the failure would actually occur at the bottom of the movement. But what really happens in reality is we get to the bottom of a movement, and then we use everything we have in our power to try and accelerate up. And then the sticking point where we fail is usually going to be right around parallel, somewhere in the middle of that squat, right? So you can kind of see that as an example of the two different styles of of ascending with the weight. And so I think that there's probably utility in both. I think they're both probably pretty effective. I think part of the question asked explosive reps with more weight. And my question back would be, if you're using more weight, then there's potentially a higher fatigue cost. And if you're exploding out of the bottom, like if I'm doing a squat where I'm exploding up and launching, then it's probably not as specific to my quads. Like the quads are still doing a shit ton of work, but you're probably also, using a little bit of glute and some hip to get out of that bottom position and launch yourself up. So now you have the question of, well, I'm using more weight, which means there's a higher fatigue cost, and I'm recruiting more muscles to use more weight. So there's less of like an acute stimulus. So do I think that there's a massive difference in like you're going to get bigger 10 years from now if you lift one style over the other? And my answer is no. Like I think both styles over the course of time will get you to your goal. I think when you look at it a little more nuanced and you look at what the fatigue cost is versus the stimulus that you can achieve from a style and performance of rep execution, there's the way where you're a little more specific to the muscles is just going to give you a better return on your investment if hypertrophy is your goal.
Yeah, I generally agree with almost everything you said there, or most of everything, I should say. The one question I had, intentionally slowing down your concentrics. Do you know?
No, definitely not.
Because that's kind of what training with slow, perfect reps. Like obviously the eccentric we want to be under control, but I don't think you want to purposefully slow down your concentric portion.
No. So when I talk about that example of trying to get out of the bottom of a squat, in both examples, whether you're launching yourself up, essentially flooring the gas pedal, or if you're just gently pushing on the gas pedal with this idea that it's going to get floored. You're just not going to go from no pressure to all the pressure in one fell swoop. It's going to be a gradual press where eventually it gets floored, but it's just not launching into that position. So both of them have the intent, maximal concentric intent, right? You're trying to lift the weight as fast as you can in both circumstances. It's just one of them is so explosive that it's recruiting a bunch of other muscles to help you get through that. And the other one is trying to lift as fast as possible, but more specific to just the one piece of the muscle that you're trying to use, or the one muscle you're trying to use.
Yeah, pretty spot on. Really just the potential downside of the launching is you kind of throw yourself out of optimal positioning to change your stimulus.
Yeah, and you recruit other muscles that you're not intending to do, which therefore has a higher fatigue cost and all these different things.
The last thing I would say on this is there may be some certain movements where you do want to intentionally move ever so slightly slower through a portion so that you're not creating so much momentum that you're not under that much tension through other parts of the range of motion.
Yeah, that's more or less what I'm saying. And I think it certainly applies to some movements more than others, but I think it can apply to all movements generally. And then even more to something like a leg curl where the first 15 degrees are going to be more calf. That's a super, super specific example, but I think just generally it applies to the way you perform movements, not across all movements.
Yeah, I agree. I think so.
Cool. I'll send this one to you and then we can discuss. But what courses do you feel a trainer should do, or the best ways to educate himself?
So this is something that I feel rather strongly on. However, I'm sure I am probably of a lesser common opinion. I personally think the best education and knowledge you are going to get is going to be from private organizations, businesses, and coaches. The larger education curriculums get, I think the more kind of watered down they get. That being said, if you're someone who's entering the space, you need a big cert, licensure, whatever, to kind of get your foot in the door. But from there, I wouldn't go from huge company A, who I have my first cert, to huge company B. I would probably go, who are the best people in the space, who is really moving the space forward, and then going into that sort of thing. I know this is the conversation that we talk about a lot, but it's hey, I'm a brand new personal trainer. I'm going to go to like maybe ISSN and get my, entry level trainer number 1 type certification. Now do I go to what's the other one? The NASM, right? Am I going to go to NASM and get like another entry level cert? Like, no, you go to fucking N1 and CASM and get like a world-class actual understanding of everything. So it's like, get your foot in the door, then you go find the best people and go learn directly from them. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think that like what you're basically saying in like a bird's eye view is that you get the general education almost like you would in like your bachelor's degree or whatever. And then after you finish that, you can be like, okay, well, this is the part of this that I'm interested in. So, I really want to learn more about programming and training, or I want to learn more about nutrition and these types of things, or maybe it's both, or, I really want to focus on the biomechanics of movement, or I really want to learn more about energy systems, or like whatever these different things are that you find extremely interesting within the framework of fitness as a whole, health and fitness. Then you can get a little more specific and search out those certifications from the smaller organizations. Yeah. And I agree with N1, of course, for like a hypertrophy training programming perspective. N1 is great. OPEX is always the one that I suggest for like more of a functional fitness, CrossFit-y style one, as I went through both of those. So those would be my advice there.
Yep, I would agree. This one will kick over to you, Brian. So it's a little bit of a long-winded question, but it's full of context, which is really, really cool. Do you think there is a per session training stimulus that must be achieved within that given session in order to see gains in the context of hypertrophy? So as you become more advanced, do you think there is a necessary amount of volume one must do within a given session rather than spreading it out? Then with an example, is it possible one could experience faster gains by doing 3 sets in one session rather than one set spread over 3 sessions of the week? What are your thoughts here, Brian?
Yeah, I do. And my first thought was to think back to something I read in Weightology a while ago. And because our podcast is at 6 a.m., I didn't get a chance to look this up. But as I was falling asleep last night, it was like turning in my brain. So I'm sorry, I don't know if James Krieger actually did this study, if it was even a meta-analysis. In my brain, what I think is that it was James Krieger that did a meta-analysis, but I could be completely wrong. It could just be James Krieger reviewing something in Weightology. But essentially what this did was it assessed whether there is in fact a minimum training volume per session and a maximum. And I believe the reason I think it was a meta-analysis because I think it was a study of studies that found that the low end of stimulus for a muscle group in a session is around 3 sets and that the high end is around 10 sets. And of course, there's variability there based on the individual. But when you look at that, essentially, if you're somebody that needs, call it 18 sets a week for a muscle group, then you have the option of you could do it 9 sets over 2 different sessions each, right? To get to 18, you could go 6 and 12. If you're going to do 6 sessions a week, like say you have 6 full body sessions, you could do 3 sets in each session. But alternatively, let's look at someone different and say this person now only has 8 sets that they need for a muscle group. Well, that person couldn't split it over 4 full body sessions because now they're only getting 2 sets per session. So this person would either do it like as a bro split, like the way we look at frequency now in the literature is that it's just a way to distribute volume. So you don't actually need to go to 2 times a week for a body part unless you're going to exceed the 10 sets per session piece. So if this person's doing 8 sets in a week, they could opt to do it in like a bro split manner and do all 8 sets on one day. They could also opt to do it 4 and 4 or 6 and 2. 6 and 2 again, I guess it's the 2 would be like, it wouldn't fit into like kind of what the minimum capacity is. But with that said, that's kind of the way I split mine. Like I have 6 sets on one day for quads and hams, and then I have 2 sets on the other day for quads and hams. That actually just increased to 3 last week, but for the first few weeks it was 2. So I mean, do I think that I'm getting no benefit because I'm doing 2 sets on one of the days? And the answer is no, but I'm like purposefully trying to get less there. It's almost just like a touch up sort of, because I have this one big day where all the stuff is occurring. And then the other day is just this little like touch up before I get back to the big day again. But to circle that all back to your question, I do think that there is probably a minimum. I think that minimum depends on how hard you're pushing your sets. Because like you could easily just say that 3 sets is an arbitrary number, but is that 3 sets to 3 RIR? Because if that's 3 sets to 3 RIR, then maybe 1 set to 0 RIR with some partials is the same stimulus as 3 sets to 3 RIR. So there's so much ambiguity there. And when you look at these meta-analyses from like someone like Krieger, who I know trains with RIR and stuff like that. Like my assumption is that when you're looking at the literature, and even if it says these people are training to failure, based on what we know about the ambiguity of failure in the literature, my assumption would be that it's probably around 2 RIR. So just kind of going down that rabbit hole, I personally think 1 or 2 sets to like failure with some intensity techniques would be completely fine. And if you're going to use RIR, then probably 3 or 4 sets would be a good minimum for a specific muscle group in a session.
I'm definitely going to really lean on Brian on this question. These are some of these things that I feel like it's really hard to quantify here because it really, really does depend. So for example, like part of the question says, as you become more advanced, you think there is a necessary amount of volume one must do within that given session. As you become more advanced, your ability to contract those muscle tissues and specifics improves. So like me here in 2022 at 34 years old, I can get much better stimulus out of 3 sets of like let's say a very targeted bicep curl than I could 5 years ago, because I have just become more advanced. I understand things better. I understand lengthened versus shortened and that sort of thing. It's hard to create apples to apples because things change as you get more advanced. And then in the last part of the question, could you experience faster gains by doing 3 sets in one session rather than 1 set spread out over 3 days of the week? Probably not. But for some reason, what comes to mind is like, let's warm you up, put you on a hack squat. You have 1 See God set, right? Let's say you can get 18 reps. But then if we were to give you a second, hey, go See God again, you only get like 11 reps. And then on the third one, you get like 7. If we give you 2 days and you come back on Wednesday and I'm like, hey, once you do another See God set on the hack squat, you can probably get like 16 or 17 reps. So if we were to use...
You're not recovered.
Yeah, you're recovered. You've had 48 hours, So if that we're splitting 3 sets over 3 days, you end up doing, what ended up being like 18, 12, and 7, you go like 18, 17, 16. That's a fair amount of, more stuff accumulated. But it also comes into the factor of like, what is your energy utilization, right? Like, where's your carbohydrate recompensation? How much muscle glycogen do you have? It's a rabbit hole, really. So, these sorts of things, I would just test, see how you feel. What is your current limitations around recovery, pushing yourself? Like maybe you're not pushing yourself really, really hard to these sets. I would explore that. But it really is a can of worms, but I do think what is the most tangible takeaway advice, I think Brian covered really, really well.
Yeah. No, and then just really good point on the lengthen and shorten too, because like the apples to apples thing, if you're just arbitrarily saying is 3 sets enough for 1 muscle group in a session, or, is 1 enough? It's like, are you doing 3 sets of lying leg curls and 1 set of RDL? Because like 1 set of RDL could fuck you up more than 3 sets of leg curls could. But looking at this example, you'd think that 3 sets must be more stimulus because it's 3 sets. So, so muscle length certainly plays a role in there too.
Definitely. Okay. Let's kick this one over to you to start again. So from a beginner standpoint, would it be more beneficial to focus on the big lifts? If so, what role would machines and cables play in a beginner's workout plan?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. I was actually just on with Dave and Abel 2 days ago. The episode hasn't come out yet, but we were talking about the topic of minimalist training. And what that brought us back to was kind of discussing some of the ways that we got started with training, especially for me. How I've mentioned before on the podcast that in the late 90s, I stumbled into a forum called Power and Bulk, where a guy named Paul Carter was kind of a big name in the group and, providing advice for people. And he basically told me to choose a leg, a push and a pull, and do that on one day and then rest 2 or 3 days and choose a leg, a push and a pull, and come back and do that again. And just basically repeat those 2 workouts over the course of time with rest days in between until I was big and strong. I thought that was great advice at the time. He has since told me that that wasn't good advice and that he would go back on it. But that's a story for another day because I think it was great advice. I do think there's something to learning those movements. His argument as to why that isn't great advice for a beginner is because of how complex those movements are. So you have a back squat and a deadlift and a bench press and overhead press and pull-ups and rows, basically the big 6 movements. And they all involve extending at multiple joints. So none of them are isolation movements, which makes them complex. You need a lot of stability to be able to squat and deadlift properly, a lot of core control, pelvic control, stuff like that, which a lot of beginners don't have. So what I think now, and I kind of just came up with this idea when I was on the podcast with Dave and Abel, but I kind of think now that the best route for a beginner is to choose 6 basic lifts, exactly like the 6 that I listed, except to not be so tied to them being barbell movements. So what if instead of it being back squat, deadlift, bent over row, pull up, overhead press, and bench press, what if you just chose 6 machine, cable, or dumbbell, other form of movement that just fit your body really well, but still fit those movement patterns? So thinking about me, maybe it's pendulum squat, RDL, chest supported T-bar row, iliac lat pull down, anterior delt dumbbell press, and dumbbell fly press. So those are the exact same 6 movement patterns that I listed earlier. They're just done with different implements that fit my body better. And so as a beginner, you may not know, you're a beginner. You're well, why wouldn't I use barbells? Barbells are cool. I don't know that a pendulum squat fits me better than a back squat does. And that's fair too. Maybe you do try it, but maybe you're not so tied to those specific lifts that if you do start doing one of them and you find that you don't have the stability or the pelvic control, or you have compensations occurring, maybe it's not the end of the world if instead of back squatting, you decide to go into a hack squat or a leg press. So anyway, that would be my thoughts on that. I think that you don't need to be doing a bunch of isolation movements. You don't need to be doing a bunch of curls and a bunch of lateral raises and worrying about lining up joint angles with cables and all that stuff. But you should pick movements that feel great for you. And if that's the barbell movements, then awesome. And if it's not, then I think you can sub in the movements that would feel good that are similar movement patterns.
I think for me, I would have to say a bit of a blend between the two. My fear of going with the latter route is I do agree the barbell movements are really hard to learn for a beginner, but you learn a lot around mechanics and how your body operates and stuff. I think if you were to just put a beginner in a pendulum squat, the concept of balance and foot pressure and things you don't inherently learn these because they don't matter, because the machine will kind of force you here. Whereas like if you don't have your foot pressure right in like in a barbell back squat, like you're gonna fall the fuck over, you know? So it's like I don't feel very confident answering it in any way, but I think a bit of a blend, like a dumbbell, right, bench press, I think could be fantastic, right? Because you're getting the same basic thing, but you're learning, hey, you're not fixed, you're not locked into like a fixed movement pattern. But I agree. I don't think you need like a barbell overhead press, but some basic form of like the six movements or six basic movement patterns. But yeah, I mean, that one's really, really hard because I feel like you get your ass kicked learning those barbell movements, but you learn around like moving your body through space and using balance and different things. So that one's really, really hard. But I think there could be some really, really basic like machines that could be fantastic. Like a chest supported row would be an absolutely fantastic one. Things like that for sure.
Yep, totally. I agree. Yeah, I basically think the main finishing thought here is just that you don't need to be spending a bunch of time on single joint isolation movements, and that you should pick the big compounds that work a lot of stuff and just focus on getting strong on those. But I'm not super tied to exactly what those big compounds are or what device you use to implement them. Cool. Well, I just moved one of these nutrition questions up because I feel like there's just so many training questions in a row. So I'm going to give you a chance to answer one here. So if one's diet consists of beef and chicken, would adding fat from nuts be beneficial?
So I really, really like how you framed this question. So thank you, listener, for framing it in such. Would adding fats from nuts be beneficial? Right? I say yes, and here's why. We have a few different classifications of types of fats. The fat coming from animal products, namely like beef and chicken, is going to be overwhelmingly saturated fat based. The easiest way to identify saturated fats are they are stable at room temperature. So think about when you cook some chicken or you cook some beef, you put it back in the fridge, you pull it out again to have more, and here's the fat's all solidified, looks like some gross fucking weird beef jello combination. Or coconut oil in the cabinet in the wintertime. It's going to be a solid. The types of fats in nuts are going to be largely either monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats. So they have different properties. So for example, your omega-3 fatty acids are going to be a form of polyunsaturated fats. Each has its kind of different pluses and minuses. What I do personally, what I do with my clientele and what I generally recommend, there are people that are going to say, hey, saturated fats are the absolute devil, never have them. And then there's going to be people on the complete opposite side of the thing that say, no, they're like, literally Jesus reincarnate. You should have all the saturated fats. I follow a higher protein diet. I do with my clients as well. Just as a byproduct of that higher protein diet, there will be an adequate amount of saturated fat in the diet just as a byproduct of the protein, beef, chicken we're eating. With the amount of fats left in the diet, I generally recommend getting more of that from your poly and monounsaturated sources from things like nuts, seeds, extra virgin olive oil, avocado, those sorts of things. So you end up at the end of the day with a bit of a blend, not super, super high in one, super, super low in the other. But I generally, unless someone is having like a very, very high fat diet, I generally am not having people purposefully take in large amounts of saturated fat. So to kind of wrap up, yes, I would 100% say that adding fats from nuts and other fat sources that are poly and monounsaturated would be beneficial.
Do you have any caution or thought around the fact that a bunch of nuts are really high in omega-6s?
Yeah. So I generally I don't have clients eat peanuts. I'm going to push towards either walnuts or Brazil nuts in like 8 out of 10 cases. Almonds I'm fine with. I use Chronometer with my clientele. We can see their omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, and things like chia seeds, ground flaxseed or flaxseed, they're going to be higher in ALA, which doesn't convert well, but it still is an omega-3. I will generally try and get people to like a 5-to-1 ratio. It's not even great, but like a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, or supplementing an omega-3, which helps close that gap between the two.
Cool. Sweet. I have like 15, maybe 20 minutes left. So let's try and get through the rest of these. Like maybe 5 or 6 questions left. So this person's asking for examples of metabolic training. And we actually did an entire episode on this, didn't we? Called metabolic training. So I'll just be really, really quick here. Basically, the two types of metabolic training are systemic and local. So you can kind of think of systemic training as training your heart to be better. Basically, systemically, you are trying to improve your work capacity and get better at breathing, converting these different things to usable oxygen, etc. And then local metabolic training is going to focus specifically on one individual muscle and trying to increase the work capacity of that muscle. So you can kind of think of systemic training as almost like circuit training. It really is it's not cardio at all. It's basically lifting weights, but taking shorter rest periods than you usually would, and alternating between big muscle groups. So you might go from like a quad to a back to a chest movement with relatively short rest, and then take a longer rest. So that would be more of like a circuit style systemic type thing. And then a local metabolic training would be like something like a same muscle group superset, which we talked about a ton in last week's episode. Or something along the lines of like an 8x8, which Vince Garanda popularized, I think, in the 80s, which is essentially you take your 15 rep max on a lift and you'll do it for sets of 8 reps until you reach one failure point at the end, which is usually somewhere between 6 and 8 sets. And then the other thing with metabolic training is it's usually done primarily with short overload movements so that you're not trying to create a metabolic effect with movements that are going to create a ton of damage and systemic fatigue. So yeah, those would kind of be the main principles. And then I would refer you back to the episode on metabolic training, which was 2 or 3 months ago, I believe.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add on that one. That's Brian nailed it there.
Yeah. So the next question is asking about optimal quad hypertrophy in 2 times a week programming. And I'm just going to assume that he doesn't mean he's training only twice a week, but that he's training quads twice a week. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the frequency conversation is really interesting because I don't think that I could get the same amount of stimulus out of quads in one day as I could over 2. I think the excuse me, I think the central fatigue would be way too high. And I think after so many sets, like I can't produce anything meaningful anymore. I would probably get sick. I had that period where I was training legs like really, really hard about 1.5 years ago. I was getting sick regularly after my leg training sessions. I think there's just a cap on you're done for the day, dude. Like you need to just come back and add more volume, and once you're mostly recovered, sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, like my volume's low enough that like I'm doing 8 or 9 sets a week right now for quads. So I have like 6 on one day and 3 on another at the moment. But I think, depending on what your volume needs are, kind of depends how you split that up. If we assume that you're like a normal person and say you need 12 to 16 sets, you could easily just go 6 to 8 sets per session. And there's a number of ways you can splice that up that it would all be effective. Like you could have more of a focus on short overloading on one of the days and a little more focus on some of the damaging movements on another day. You may want like a day that is a leg day that's a little more glute dominant or hip dominant, and a day that's a little more quad dominant. So if you split it up that way, kind of like the way that I do, then you'll have a lot of your damaging quad work on one of the days, and then maybe you'll have just a 1 or 2 smattering of like some less fatiguing movements on another day. Or maybe even, you put like a glute focused leg press or a glute focused split squat on your hamstring hip day, but you're still going to get plenty of quad stimulus doing like a glute focused leg press or a glute focused split squat. So I think, how you arrange that, really, there isn't like an optimal way. There's just a number of great ways that can work. and you kind of need to find what works best for you. Probably as much psychologically as physiologically too. Cause like for me with leg training, it certainly is as much psychological, like the way that it's split up and like not creating a ton of anxiety going into sessions, but being more excited about the session, is hugely important when it comes to quads.
I agree 100%.
Cool. Do you want to jump to a nutrition one real quick?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. After 12 weeks cut, better to do a maintenance phase or start a lean bulk?
So one thing that I will say with this, and something that I think I oftentimes think people jump the gun a little bit of a lean bulk. If we think about it, right, we all got introduced to training when we were younger because we wanted that like physique or whatever. You're at the end of a 12-week cut. You finally have that lean physique. Do you really want it to go away in 3 weeks, 4 weeks when you start the lean bulk? So I'm kind of like in the camp of like, hang out there. Like you just busted your ass for 12 weeks to get this cut. Like enjoy that leaner physique for a little bit. Do your due diligence of making sure food levels are appropriate or adequate so that you're not still dieting or doing something inadvertently that you don't want to. But it can be fine to just, hey, introduce food enough that's going to stop your continued loss, support training, support, maybe reestablishing some, to whatever degree of diminished testosterone, sex hormone, thyroid hormone levels, and just enjoy being lean for maybe 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And then from there, you can start your kind of lean gain period after that. But I have done this in the past as well, where I've kind of rushed it a little bit. And then you're like, fuck, I just worked so hard to get lean. And now I look, don't even look like I lift again, a month and a half later sort of thing. So that's what I would recommend. And then see how you feel from there.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that one. Cool, that was quick. So the next one I'll take here, the person is asking short, intense, full body sessions almost every day, like 2 sets per body part in different splits. And I think that I would refer you back to the prior question we answered in this segment where we were talking about the minimum volume per session, because I think that can add some context for you. And then I think that this is like a viable way of training. Menno Henselmans has been training this way for maybe a decade, at least half a decade. And he believes he's making progress, and he's a super experienced, veteran of the industry. So I think if this is something that works for you psychologically, then I see no reason that you couldn't come in and do this. You just have to the thing with full body training every day is you have to organize it in like a manner where there's not a ton of overlap. And it's really difficult to do 2 lengthened lower body movements in back-to-back days. Like even if that's going from like hack squat one day to RDL the next day, but on a even more quad specific basis, like imagine trying to go from hack squat one day to like leg press the next day to like back squat the day after that. More likely it would be like hack squat one day, leg extension, then maybe a day off of quads where you're still doing the rest of the full body. And then, there's another quad exercise the day after that. So just because you're organizing it in full body sessions doesn't mean you need to hit every muscle group every day. Remember that your biceps get hit with back work. So maybe you can skip bicep work on a day with a lot of back work, or your triceps get hit with like some chest and some shoulder work. So maybe you don't need to hit your triceps as much. So I would just keep that in mind, and I think it's a totally viable way of training.
I think I don't think it's probably optimal, but if you're someone who likes a lot of like variation and you want to train almost every day and you're like, hey, I'm going to do a lesser volume, I want a larger variation of total movements in my week because it's just fun or different. Like I think, again, like Brian said, it's totally viable. It just requires a little bit more of strategic planning because of your recovery between lifting that body part again is lesser. So if you end up with too much lengthened, biased movements, you're going to get really fucking sore.
Yeah. It's never worked for me. I've tried full body, full body 3 times a week works really well for me, but I've tried full body 4, 5, 6 times a week. And it never works for me, as much psychologically as physiologically. Like some people like it because they say they never have to have a leg day, like a true leg day. They just like kind of sprinkle legs in there. To me, it felt like every day was leg day, because every fucking day I went in there was some big movement that was going to demolish me. And like psychologically, I just couldn't do it. So to each their own, you know. Okay, this I think is actually, we still have 3 more questions. This person likes benching for hypertrophy. I'm assuming barbell benching. But it seems like everyone on the internet is saying it's terrible, ? So I actually think that benching with a barbell is fine if that's going to be your lengthened overload movement. I think there's 2 reasons probably why people are saying that 3 reasons why people are saying the barbell bench is not great for hypertrophy. One is because everything goes through these shifts. And for so many years, barbell benching was like the only movement for hypertrophy. And it's taken the same course as kind of the back squat, where it's like, hey, it's not bad for hypertrophy, but you don't have to do it. And a lot of people take this, you don't have to do it, to mean that somehow it's not good. And that's not true. It's just, you don't have to do it. You can get chest gains without it. So second, the reason that people say it's not good is because it doesn't have any adduction, which means that it doesn't move the arm across the body, which is the natural line of push for the pec fibers around the rib cage. So that's why I said it would primarily be great for like a lengthened overload movement choice, because the majority of the tension you're getting on the chest is going to be the bottom half of the range of motion, because you would want a movement like you could do with dumbbells. You would want that to come across the chest more. But even when you look at dumbbells bench pressing, you still lose tension at the top of the rep. Like once your joints are all stacked and your elbows are locked and the dumbbells are sitting with your arms straight, there isn't any tension on the chest at that point. Same with a barbell. So a dumbbell is really only, a little bit better than the barbell because it allows you to come across the body, but both of them lack tension at the top, which is why then we have movements like short position overload, like the press around movement, because if you're going to try to get the pec short, the fully shortened position of the pec is going to have your arm across the body. And the bench press doesn't do that. So, I think the barbell bench press is a fine movement. You would just want to combine it with a movement that has adduction at the short position. And I think that the combination of a push around with a barbell bench press would be a completely fine combination that would train your pecs completely.
I have nothing to add there. Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. I'll still use benching a little bit. I generally go with a more narrow grip now, but I still can get a really good chest stimulus out of it. It's really how does it feel in your joints? How does it feel in the target musculature? But like Brian said, consider the lengthened overload. You also want something that's going to bias the short position just to really get the most robust stimulus out of your chest that you could.
Yep, and you can't hit the short position without coming across the body. So you just need to have a movement that goes along with the barbell bench press. Cool. Last training question. How do you determine arm path of a given exercise is good or bad and lines up with the joints? My answer is kind of just like you kind of got to learn this stuff. Like you got to go to an N1 practical or go through the biomechanics course. You can, obviously just kind of pick at their free content online and you'll probably learn a whole lot. Very simply, one of the best ways to line up with a cable movement is to set your body and the cable in a way in which the cable lines up with the path of the motion. So meaning that you're not trying to fight the cable the whole time. So imagine if it's a super specific example, but imagine I'm trying to do like an incline cable press where I'm trying to press up. But imagine you, like a silly person, put the cables like 7 slots too high. So now the cables are up and you're like, well, I'm trying to press up, but the cables aren't like lining up with the line of the motion that I'm trying to press. So then you think intuitively like a smart person that you are, and you move the cables down so that now when you go to press, your forearm is forming a line with the cable and you don't actually have to break that line as you press. And now you've created this alignment of joints with the cable structure. So I think in a lot of ways, like if you get it close, it can be ambiguous and you can be like, yeah, this feels great. Cause I went through a lot of that too, where I had it like really close. And then Cass would, tell me like move it up one or down one or whatever, and it would feel better. But when you're way off and you're fighting the cable the whole time, like, that shit, you can feel it. Like it just doesn't feel good. So within the spectrum of close enough, you can then finagle with your setup from there and try to get it like super specific to line up with the joint, with the forearm, with the cable, and create this whole spectrum of alignment.
Yeah, the only little thing I'll add there, if you are doing a more like a bicep or tricep or maybe even potentially shoulder type movement where you are doing most of your it's like elbow flexion, you're basically going to line the cable up with your humerus, right? So I think about like a bicep tricep thing. And then if you were doing a like more chest or back type movement where it's going to be the joint moving most is going to be a little bit more distal, right? Closer to the body, you are going to line the cable up with the forearm. And that's like a really simplified way of wrapping your head around. It's not perfect, but it does start thinking, okay, am I doing a bicep curl? Is the cable in line with my humerus, right? Am I doing a pull down? Is the cable in line with my forearm, sort of thing can help.
Yep. I love that. No, that's a great way of putting it too. Cool. And then the last question is just someone asking if we do one-off consults, if he could pay for an hour of our time. And so I was going to write him back privately and not even include this, but just in case other people are interested in doing this, I do this relatively often, mostly when people email me or DM me or whatever. And we could negotiate rates, but I usually do... let's not even talk about it. We'll just talk about rates when you hit me up, but they're relatively reasonable as what you would expect for an hour of someone's time.
This was interesting. I'm glad we're taking two separate approaches. I do not. I am getting to a point where I am really realizing how valuable and how much I value my time, and it is I can't offer it at a rate that is mostly I feel is reasonable for people to break my flow of the work and the things that I'm delivering, the things I have to get to my clients. Like in order for me to price you into that, it'd have to be high for me to like sacrifice the opportunity costs on that time. And I just know this is for me, right? I never want to speak for Brian. That information that I can give you on that call is going to be applicable for at most maybe 4 weeks, and then it needs to change again, sort of thing. And at the rate that I would charge you, you'd just be better off signing up for my coaching. Like it would be cheaper literally to do that. So that's why I do not do it. I have done it for like some older clients who have been in like a really bad spot, and I just really want to help them out. But other than that, I generally do not do it because it's limited in the efficacy of what I can give you in 60 minutes, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. No, and I get all those points too. I mean, I totally vibe with them, and I pretty much agree. The main reason I do it is because I only take on 3 one-on-one clients at a time. And so I want to be able to try to help people. And honestly, to be honest, most of the people that are asking me to do this are people that are doing one of my group programs. And so they're like, hey, I want to individualize this piece of the program, or can you help me figure out how I should do my nutrition over the next 12 weeks of the training program, or, I want to train for Murph. Actually, I just had a girl recently who wanted to train for Murph, and also do my group programming. And so we had like a consult call about how one might go about modifying my programming so that she can train for Murph along with it. But it's usually stuff like that. I enjoy it though. I think it's cool to be able to talk to different people. And then like 3DMJ does a really similar thing. So they only take on one-on-one clients right now that are contest prepping because they just have a full roster. So the way that they handle people that want to do one-on-one coaching with them but don't but they don't have a spot for. They do these kind of once a month consults. And I think at least as of 2 years ago, 3DMJ was charging, I think, around $200 for these hours, which is similar to what I charge. And you would basically just have like an hour chat with one of the coaches. At the end of it, you know, maybe they design you a small training cycle for the next 4 weeks until you guys meet again. And then, you know, you talk again for an hour and they design you another one. And so it's almost like a one-on-one coaching, but instead of meeting weekly, you're just meeting monthly type thing. So I think that that's kind of like a cool way of going about it as well for someone like me who, you know, I only have 3 slots for one-on-one coaches or one-on-one clients. If somebody wanted to have a feeling of a one-on-one plan, then, you know, a once every 4 week call or something like that could be a cheaper option. So
yeah,
anyways,
I do like
thoughts.
that, and I do potentially in the future something like that. But I mean, I have not full actually. So if you are interested in coaching, my client roster is not full. Really, little plug there. But yeah, it's just I haven't been able to price it at something that I feel like comfortable. Because if I'm being completely honest, it would be me asking you a ton of these wormhole questions, and then it would be like, well, we could do this or we could do this, but this is going to be contingent upon like these 3 things.
Depends.
It would be 60 minutes of me saying it depends and I need more data. And I think because like I like to be very, very hands-on with my coaching because I really want to control the outcomes as much as I can, because people come to me to get results. Like I need to have my hands in your pockets as much as I can to help you get these results. And in that dynamic, I can't have my hands in your pockets, so I can't help you as much as I would want to.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. That makes sense. Well, I am past my time, so we need to wrap this thing up, and I need to get kids to school.
All right. So Brian has to take his kids to school. So guys, we will talk to you next week. Have a fantastic week. Thanks for listening.
Later.